It takes us to our talk of the tape, the next leg of this record-setting rally. It's clear where our headliner stands on that topic. He's bullish, as you know. He is Fundstrat's Tom Lee. Joins us now at Post 9. It's good to see you.
Great to see you, Scott.
Nvidia looms large. Does that make or break whether your bullishness comes to fruition moving forward?
I know investors are really anxious, and Nvidia has not performed well the last few times it's reported. But the story arc there remains that that is one of the most important companies in the world in the middle of the biggest structural change in the world economy. So I think Nvidia still is a great story. It really wouldn't change our thesis if the stock reacted poorly.
You feel like there's become a little more AI anxiety, as we wrote at the top? You know, from Sam Altman at OpenAI saying that, investors are a little overeager about AI. Meta's reorganized again. They've stopped their hiring. There was another report today that suggested some of these Gen AI models are failing. You think there's anxiety in this market about this trade?
Well, I think everyone's trying to get situational awareness. Like, is this inning 1 or 2 or late innings? Because we know there's been a lot of value creation and a lot of capital that's flowed in. And we know that Silicon Valley has seen a boom of companies with $100 million annual run rates, like in record time around AI. And a lot of people want to ring the bell at the top. But to me, it still feels really early because there's such a limited number of stocks that public investors can buy that represent a direct play on AI.
I know, but that could lead to bubble-like activity, right? When your pool of investable opportunities remains so small, all of this money rushes to a select few, and then they have to live up to all of that hype and give a great return on these hundreds of billions of dollars that are being invested. That's not a risk?
Well, it is a risk. I guess that's really the next stage of what we have to see is how does the market accept now adding to the roster of direct AI plays, beyond just Figment. And I think, if we look at the next 12 months, there'll be a bevy of IPOs, some really big companies that are later stage. But if they're bought and they produce good growth and their stocks perform well, I would still say that still means we're early innings.
It's still your favorite trade?
I think it's the most important trade, yeah.
I know it's the most important. I feel like that's legit. But is it?
I think there's a bigger upside in the owning financials right now. Because financials are benefiting from AI.
Okay.
So they're the second order beneficiaries. Plus they're getting the green light to build on the blockchain, which could really make JP Morgan and Goldman's business models so much more profitable and change their multiples, expand them. So I think, yes, I'm still bullish on AI, but I actually think the financials are really one of the legs that drive us the next 12 to 24 months.
Oh, interesting. No matter what the Fed does from here, does the rate picture matter for the bank stocks?
It does, because it helps. It provides the liquidity to sort of liquefy housing and corporate lending and bring spreads down. But I think the financial sector has produced visible earnings growth for a long time through these cycles, and they are trading like cyclical stocks. JP Morgan and Goldman should maybe have tech multiples, and so I think there's upside for financials.
They're aside from when the broadening started to happen on the idea of rate cuts, those were the type of stocks already that were leading this market along with the mega caps. This is a large cap stock rally, right? Industrials,
correct.
The biggest names out of the industrials, the biggest names out of the financials, the biggest names in tech were leading the way.
Yes.
Do you think that continues?
Yes, and because, at the end of the day, when you look at GDP, for every unit of economic activity, there's one unit of financial. So financials are half the economy, but they're not half the index. Now, I'm not saying they're going to get to half the index, but they really should re-rate. I think even this quarter, right, the numbers from JP Morgan, Goldman, and the financials, and look at the bullish IPO, these are all good signs to me that you want to be overweight financials.
Does the calendar matter for the market, right? September is historically a bad month. We like to look at the seasonals. Some people do to determine, what they want to do. Do you follow that much?
Yeah, I care about the seasonals because that we know becomes the base case for investors. Just like August was a month everybody was wary. So then what you have to build in September is, are there things that can be positive surprises for markets? And to me, that's going to be the Fed.
A positive surprise?
Well,
you think it's
positive,
a surprise at this
well,
point?
okay, a positive versus the base case. Because if you look at all the Septembers in the past, this time is a Fed on hold that's finally cutting. So that makes this September better. And then the idea the ISMs could recover, which really doesn't usually happen in the fourth quarter, but it could finally happen. We've had 29 months of the ISM below 50. So I think that we could have a better than expected September, October, November, December, because of the Fed cutting and now the ISM turning.
Yeah, I mean, but not just ISM, right? We got to watch jobs again, and we have to look at the inflation prints again.
That's right. Yeah, and that's where, again, that's where we have to rely on the Fed to make good decisions, and Fed independence being critical, because we want the Fed to do what's right for the economy.
Some say Fed independence is already shot. And today, or last night's news of the president moving to fire the governor, Lisa Cook, is the nail in the coffin of that conversation, at least for now.
I hope that's not the case, in the sense that...
Not the case of what? That he actually fires her? Or that it's marks the official end of Fed independence?
Both, actually, Scott, because I think that there's a window for this to have a dignified ending or outcome for Cook, and I don't know if that means people take a step back and reverse what they've done, or if that means Cook is allowed to resign. I think it is important for that to be a process the market accepts, because you're right. I think the market would get very nervous about Fed independence being questioned.
Okay, on that note, let's bring in Steve Leisman. He joins us on the phone. Steve, we have a statement now from the Fed. I've been wondering when they were going to say something on this topic, and in fact, they have. What are they saying?
I'm just reading it now, Scott. I didn't know it was going to come out. I have it now. It looks like they're saying that Congress directed that governors serve in long fixed terms and may be removed by the president only for cause. Long tenures and removal protections for governors serve as a vital safeguard. The Fed will continue to carry out duties as established by law. Lisa Cook has indicated through her personal attorney she will promptly challenge this action in court and seek a judicial decision that would confirm her ability to continue to fulfill her responsibilities. The Fed will abide by any court decision. The Fed reaffirms its commitment to transparency and accountability. So it sounds like they're backing her, Scott, in terms of her ability to challenge this thing in court and not take any action against her until there's a court decision. That's what it sounds like. And it sounds like they're, essentially not embracing the president's decision to call this cause. They're not embracing the president's own explanation for firing her for cause and saying this is not cause, and they're waiting. They're saying Cook has indicated that she will promptly challenge the action in court and seek a judicial decision that would confirm her ability to continue to fulfill her responsibilities. So they're going to wait until there's a court decision either way.
So where there was some speculation, conjecture, or what have you that, well, how is the Fed chair himself going to deal with this? Does he, make a move to ask, Governor Cook to step down? This is absolutely sounds to me the opposite of anything close to that.
It doesn't sound like that. I agree with you, Scott. It doesn't sound like he's saying to Lisa Cook, step aside. It sounds like, a bit of a punt, perhaps, is one way to put it. Like the Fed chair making a decision. He doesn't have to make a decision. Let the courts decide, and what the courts decide, the Fed will abide by. I would just note, Scott, that the Fed chair does not have the authority to remove Lisa Cook. Only the president does. And what the Fed is saying, the president does only for cause. And that seems to be the distinction the Fed does.
Were you surprised at all, and frankly, I was, that, the president's move was so many hours ago, and we're just now getting a statement from the Federal Reserve about one of its governors being fired by the President of the United States? What took so long?
Scott, I think I might throw it back at you and say my knowledge of the Fed is such that I'm surprised I have one today. To the extent that I know they act very deliberately and they're very carefully considering their options here. I think that they have not wanted to be involved in this political scrum or even in the legal scrum here. And it's a very, very difficult position for them to be in the sense that somebody has been accused of something, but not convicted of it. There are allegations here. And as far as I can tell, Scott, there's been no investigation, only the investigation of the applications. And I have asked FHFA to whether or not they've ever spoken to Cook. And I don't have a response from FHFA or Bill Pulte if he has ever asked Cook what her side of the story is. And I think what I'm seeing here is the Fed is not going to get involved. Let the courts decide whether or not, A, there's a real allegation here or a real crime that's been committed, and B, is another question, Scott, whether or not this rises to the issue of cause.
What about to the idea that this now just becomes yet another distraction that Chair Powell has to deal with? You've got questions over the construction costs. Now you have questions over alleged activity from Governor Cook. All of it, of course, superseded by the idea of the president calling out the Fed chair and the central bank itself for not cutting rates in the time frame that he wants them to.
You know, Scott, I think you're right that it's a distraction, but the question as to what is a distraction is really one of subjective interpretation, in the sense that you could argue from Powell's standpoint, from the Fed's standpoint, that the sanctity of its independence is anything but a distraction. That, in fact, what they're fighting for here is the whole enchilada. And that you might even argue, Scott, that none of the other stuff matters if the result is the Fed can be pushed around to interest rates, if allegations can cause the Fed governor to lose his or her job. And that ultimately what you're talking about is a Federal Reserve that is subservient to the administration and the political whims of a single president. That is hardly a distraction. That is the main point.
Steve, we'll leave it there. I appreciate you calling in and in real time reacting to this statement that we've been waiting for from the Federal Reserve. So we'll continue to follow that story. You want to sort of comment on this now that you've gotten this statement and it is a real concern of yours?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually a balanced statement, because I think the Fed's message is there's the court of public opinion versus the court of law. And if the court of law determines that there was cause, the Fed would actually support the decision. But I think they're making clear that there's just an accusation. But of course, there's a process to determine whether these accusations are true. So I think it's actually an appropriate response. And it does sound like it would be something acceptable to both sides, because it is simply just saying if this is true, then there is cause.
On the face of it, I would look at the market activity today and say, well, the market's just not really paying attention to the noise around it. But then if you look a little closer, I'm thinking, well, the Russell's outperforming today, up 0.8%. Is that on the idea that if the president is successful in removing Cook, you're just one step closer to filling a seat, and a very important one at that, with somebody who's predisposed to cut rates? And that's a rate cut play.
Yeah, I mean, sort of true. I'd actually think that the Russell's up today because the market's concluding the Fed can operate uninterrupted to proceed with a cut in September. Because I think if Fed independence is questioned and there's a risk even Powell's replaced, that would be a risk-off moment, and that would be the market we should see the VIX spiking and a general de-risking into a sloppy September.
All right. Stay with us. Let's expand the conversation. Bring in Liz Thomas, SoFi's head of investment strategy, Matt Stuckey as well, Northwestern Mutual, joining us. Liz, you want to just weigh in on how you're thinking about this issue? I don't want to just brush past it so fast. I mean, it's such a significant event in a group of events with this president, and how he has reacted towards a Federal Reserve that hasn't cut rates on his schedule and has attacked the chair in ways that we've never really seen before. And in some ways, this move last night is unprecedented in its own right. And how, as an investor, you care, or you think people should?
Well, I do think people have to care. I mean, we're talking about the independence of the Fed here, and we're talking about what is going to affect financial markets and the voting members of the Fed that absolutely affect financial markets. But I completely agree with Tom. I think the Fed took a good, balanced approach with this to almost say, you know what, this isn't our decision. We're going to put this in the hands of the people who need to make this decision. Whether it's a distraction and they're frustrated by it or not, I imagine they are. However, it is the right thing to do to put it in the hands of who needs to choose how we proceed. It's unfortunate that we're going through this so close to a very important Fed decision on September 17th. I don't think that it will change what that decision will be. I think it was very clear at Jackson Hole, we're getting a cut, absent some really big shock or absent some series of shocks in the data to come. But even if we do see some hotter inflation prints, PCE this Friday, CPI before the meeting, I still don't think that changes the fact that we're getting a 25 basis point cut.
Matt, on the scale of concern, where does Fed independence rank for you as it relates to where you see this market heading from here?
Yeah, sure. I think Fed independence is critical for investors. If we look at, the growth of capital markets in the United States, the strength of the U.S. dollar, they're all intertwined. And so independence at the Fed is something that I think every investor should want. I would agree with Liz in terms of the comments that she made in terms of what the Fed is messaging here. I think the message is we're going to step back and let due process take its course. And I think that's the appropriate message.
We have a new statement, actually, from the White House on the firing of Governor Cook. Megan Casella joins us now with that. What are they saying?
Hey, Scott, so this is really the first time we're hearing the White House respond to some of the statements today from Cook, saying she will challenge this in court. A White House spokesperson saying in a statement to CNBC, the president exercised his lawful authority to remove a governor on the federal board of governors for cause under the statute. The president determined there was cause to remove a governor who was credibly accused of lying in financial documents from a highly sensitive position overseeing financial institutions. So obviously these are allegations. Nothing has been proven. The Justice Department did say they were looking into these allegations against Cook. We also have heard the president a couple of times responding to reporter questions so far today in that cabinet meeting that is still ongoing. Most recently, he was asked whether he would abide by a court decision on this, and he did say that he would abide by any federal ruling or any court ruling, I should say. But earlier on Cook, he said she seems to have had an infraction and she can't have had an infraction, especially this one, given that it has to deal with housing, and she oversees housing as part of the Fed portfolio. Scott, so more from the White House on this, but standing by the president, saying this was lawful authority to make this move.
All right, Megan, thank you for the latest there. Megan Casella. Liz, what I hear you saying is irrespective of this particular move, the move that matters more is the Fed's going to cut rates. And they're probably going to do it in September, whether Lisa Cook is part of that conversation or not.
Yes, and I don't think that this changes that. I'll reiterate. I don't think that this Lisa Cook situation changes the trajectory of what the Fed is planning to do in September.
Well, is that why the market is reacting the way it is, albeit not with some, huge move higher, but we're green across the board, and we might otherwise be, looking at red across the board if there was some deep concern over this issue in and of itself?
Well, I think the market is reacting rationally. There isn't really much of a reaction. It's almost the absence of a reaction to it. We don't know what's going to happen, and I think the market realizes it doesn't necessarily matter what happens with this in the next couple weeks. What we are going to react to as market participants is if we get data that stops supporting what Powell messaged at Jackson Hole. So that being said, I still believe, even if we get some hot inflation prints, he messaged that we might get some hot inflation prints because of tariffs, and that is likely to be a shorter-term shock. We're going to monitor the situation. So even that probably doesn't change September 17th. I think the thing that we will debate, let's say data comes in much cooler than expected in these next three items. What we will start debating again is it 25 or 50. I think it's 25. I think it's 25. I don't think we're getting 50. I don't think they have to do 50, and I don't think the bond market is telling them they have to do 50.
Matt, all of this conversation and these new headlines has really overshadowed what is a critical earnings report tomorrow from Nvidia. How are you thinking about that? A bar that's been raised by a stock that's up near 40% over the past few months into this print.
Well, not only is it up 40% over the last few months, it's up over 90% from the April lows. And, just kind of going into the result tomorrow afternoon, The valuation is higher versus the last couple of prints, about 6 turns higher on the forward earnings multiple. And earnings estimates have risen about 11% just in the last few months. And there's more of a tricky kind of setup as it relates to what kind of guides we should be expecting. And really, the open question mark is China-based revenues. Or will they enter into the Q3 guide or not? I think that could be potentially up to a $3 or $4 billion swing factor in terms of the number that's posted. But this might be one of the setups and reactions where what's on the press release might not match up in terms of what's discussed on the call in terms of what type of recovery timeline investors should be expecting in terms of reintroducing China revenues back into the fundamental story for Nvidia.
Tom, you want to just put a bow on that, reacting to that?
Yeah, I might say that investors have been now patterned and bracing for Nvidia to sell off after they report tomorrow. And yet, I think the visibility and I think the conviction on AI is actually stronger. So I think there's a chance Nvidia rises dramatically after they report Wednesday after close.
Okay, that's a bold statement from somebody who's not afraid to make them. Tom, thank you. Liz, good to see you as always. Appreciate your patience. Matt as well, as we had that breaking news. We'll see all of you again soon.